Hello, my name is Tatiana Areizaga and welcome to A-List. Joining me on this edition is Roz Varon, who is the ABC 7 Chicago traffic reporter. Thank you for joining us today.
I am delighted to be here. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. What was your inspiration of going into TV and radio, starting off?
Well, I actually started as a theater major when I was in college, and after less than a year I realized that this was a very competitive field, and I decided to go into broadcasting because I thought I'd have a better chance of getting a job. Aha, not too competitive there, right? And I started in radio, and it's still a way to perform. It's a way to interact with people, and that's what I like to do. So that was really my inspiration. I mean, when I was in high school, I was a total theater geek. I watch Glee all the time. I love it. I'm such a Glee. But anyway, that's how I got started in that.
So you started in radio.
I did.
And so did you later go on to TV, or was it radio was the first?
I started in radio, and I was lucky enough to get a job in Chicago. I graduated from Columbia College, and I'm from the Chicago area. Mm-hmm. So that in itself gave me an advantage because I really knew I had a standard that I was used to from just living here. And being a student at Columbia, I was able to network with my instructors because many of the teachers there do what they teach, which is a huge advantage. So when I graduated, I didn't really want to leave the Chicago area, and there were other people who I looked up to at that time who were from the Chicago area and ended up working here and didn't have to leave. Like there was Bob Surratt. I mean, there were other people who did that, and I thought, well, I don't have to leave either. So I was very diligent, and I was lucky enough to get a part-time job right out of college at a radio station in Waukegan, working one shift overnight on Saturdays from midnight till 8 in the morning, which was brutal.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and then in December, I ended up getting a job with the traffic service. Even though I had never done traffic before, they taught me how to do traffic. You just had to give them an air check from radio. If they liked your delivery, they said, we'll teach you how. And that's how it got started. And that was in December of 1980, and I've been doing traffic ever since.
So for TV, did they ask you to come in, or did you go out and go to TV?
Well, that's an interesting question because I had done radio for 9 years, and I was always looking to break into television or, again, some kind of theater if they were filming in Chicago. And in March, the beginning of 1989, both Channel 7 and Channel 5 were starting a morning newscast. Before that, there was really no significant morning news show. They were just doing little news briefs in between the network shows. And both 5 and 7 wanted to incorporate traffic and television, which had never been done before, not in the Chicago market. So everybody who auditioned for this came from radio. And we were all pretty bad because we're trying to stand in front of a chroma key and not knowing where to point and this and that. I mean, we were terrible. But I got lucky, and I got called back, and I did a terrible, terrible performance. I was like a deer in headlights. I mean, I'm staring into this camera, and I'm like, ah! Linda Yu sits here, Marianne Childers sits here, why am I here? Oh, it was terrible. And Joe Ahern, who was the president, general manager at the time, called me, and he said, you know what, you really know traffic, but you're just too green for television. You just don't know, you don't have the presence, you don't have enough experience. So I went home and had myself a really good cry, and then I said, well, wait a minute. Who's my competition here? Everybody else is just as bad as I am, so my only competition is me. I went out and made another audition tape. I stood over an expressway, like I have done many times at Channel 7, and I sat at a desk and did a, blah, 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 back to you, Ellen, one of those things. And I wrote this very eloquent letter and said, well, if you just give me the opportunity, I will prove to you that I can be as good as any of these other people in a matter of weeks. Mm-hmm. And he hired me. And I've been there. It's the only TV station I've ever worked at. 22 years I've been there now. But they taught me how to report, since I had never done that for television either. So, I mean, where do you get a job in the #1 station, the #3 market in the country with on-the-job training? I mean, God, thank you. I was so lucky. So that's how I ended up there.
That's good. What kind of like stories do you cover? Like just traffic or like kind of accidents or?
Sometimes. My beat is the transportation beat, but I really kind of stretch that to the limit. I do stories, actually several years back when the price of gas started to really rise, I started doing stories called one-tank trips. Places you could go and have fun on a tank of gas. And I mean, yeah, it's kind of within the transportation realm, but it's very featurey and it's you know, travel related, but I love doing feature stories. I've been able to stretch outside of the transportation beat a little bit with other things that I have interests in. Charities that I participate with. I was very active in Girl Scouts for a long time. My daughter's a freshman in high school now, so we're not in Girl Scouts anymore. But I was a leader for 8 years. So I've done some stories on Girl Scouts in Chicago. I am very active in working with animals, with dogs, with the Anti-Cruelty Society, with Paws Chicago. So I've done stories on pets, dog-friendly places in Chicago. Has nothing to do with traffic, but it's so much fun to do. So I really try to come up with some fun story ideas. All of the stories that I do, 95% of the stories I do, I come up with the ideas on my own.
Oh, that's good.
The other 5% they assign to me.
How many charities are you like involved in?
Several. I still work with Girl Scouts of Chicago and Greater Northwest Indiana. I work with both of the major animal shelters in Chicago. I'm very active with breast cancer organizations because I'm a breast cancer survivor. So I work with the American Cancer Society. We partner with them every October for the Making Strides Against Breast Cancer Walk. So I'm active with that. Why Me? Several of them. So I do things like that too. Keeps me really busy.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of work with schools, high schools, colleges. So when people ask me to come and guest speak, I do that. Career days, I feel very strongly about education and students and helping where I can, particularly in this area because I'm from here. So that's my way of giving back by doing things like that.
You being diagnosed with breast cancer, how did you deal with your career and your family and the health, and like how did you balance all of it together?
It's challenging. It still is, because when I was diagnosed at stage 4, which is, you know, it's stage 4 and that's as high as it goes, because my cancer had already spread. So it was a learning experience for me just to realize how serious the health condition was. I still have to go for treatment every 3 weeks, but it's not the type of chemotherapy that is very toxic where you lose your hair. I did lose my hair in the beginning because I was doing a different treatment, but I have to go every 3 weeks. It's a target therapy drug that attacks the cancer cells and not the healthy cells, so I really don't have side effects. I scan every 4 months to make sure it doesn't come back, and I'll have to do this for the rest of my life, or if it comes back and we switch to a different treatment, because stage 4 is very serious. So I think work is kind of my distraction. I become very involved at work now, so I don't, anything that makes me focus can distract me from that. In the beginning it was very hard because I would think about it all the time. I don't think about it all the time now, and when I do, it's more like a chronic illness like diabetes or heart disease, where you take medicine and you control it and you live your life. Sometimes it's hard with my daughter because I get into those little weepy moments where I think, what if I'm not around and she hasn't graduated college, or she's not married, or I don't have a grandchild yet? That makes me sad. So I just kind of accept those thoughts, and then I push them away and move on, because I really am a glass half full kind of person.
That's good.
It's hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard. It's very challenging, because I have to get up at 2 in the morning to go to work. My hours are really crazy.
Yeah.
So I try to do that and schedule my doctor appointments and the other things I do to keep myself healthy, the yoga, the acupuncture. I mean, I do a lot of things, Pilates, to keep my body strong. It's a lot. It's easier with my daughter being a little bit older, because she's a little bit more self-sufficient. But, you know, it's just, we as women are the queens of multitasking.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you do your
Yeah.
share of multitasking.
Yes, I'm a little bit multitasking. Is your daughter the only
My only child?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is your only child?
She's really spoiled. Because she's an only. But she's
Yeah.
good too. She's, you know, the thing about having an only is, are you an only or do you have siblings?
I have a little brother.
Okay. See, you learn to be more independent because you have to. It's kind of a survival technique. So, and my husband also works early hours, so she's got to get herself up. You know, I call her at 5:30, 6 o'clock, make sure she's up, get her on, you know, she's got to get herself ready, get her breakfast, take the dogs out, blah, 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 lock the door, catch the bus, off she goes. And she's doing it. So
That's good.
I guess I did something right.
You have 2 dogs. Well, how many dogs do you have?
2.
2?
I do.
What kind of dogs are they?
They're Whippets.
Oh, I'm a dog freak, so.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have a little Yorkie.
Oh, they're so sweet.
They're little, small, cute.
Yeah, mine are about 30 pounds. Whippets are like a smaller version of greyhounds. So they have the same characteristics. They look like, you know, I call them greyhound light. But that's what they look like. They're super, super friendly, and they're just a little high-strung, but other than that, they're great dogs.
Yeah.
Gotta have 2. You have to tell your family you have to get another one so they can keep each other company.
Yeah. I've been working on it.
Well, tell them to talk to me. I'll convince them. Dogs are great too, because, you know, they're very therapeutic.
Yeah.
When I was sick, my dogs knew I was sick, and they would come up and lay in bed with me, and, you know, they just knew. And when I'm having a bad day, I go home, and they're waiting there by the door. It's unconditional love. It's like, I know what you want. You want to go for a walk. Come on, you know. It's the first thing I do when I go home. They're great.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I like doing dog stories.
Oh, yeah. And you're in the animal cruelty thing, right?
Yep. I've actually done some work with the local, like the Animal Care League out of Oak Park, some of the other local agencies. You know, the biggest problem with that is not being able to say yes to all the requests I get to do things. It's really tough, because with my schedule, I can't do anything during the evening, during the week, because I get up at 2. So they're like, oh, we'll get you home early. We'll get you home by 8. Yeah, but I'm in bed at 7. It's really tough. People don't understand. So I have to say no more times than yes. And then on the weekends, that's my only free time. So I really try to limit that as best I can. That goes back to what you were asking me about balancing everything. It's hard, because I don't have, it's not like, hey, let's go out for dinner and a movie on a Wednesday night. Can't do it. You know, it's like, come home, make sure my daughter doesn't need help with any homework, make dinner, get my clothes out for the next morning, go to bed. That's my life.
What kind of requests, like, do you get, like, different story requests, or, like, for the...
Oh, you mean from, well,
Yeah.
I do get story requests. I get those all the time. I think everybody does. Sometimes people will pitch a story because they're trying to sell something, or they want to get, you know, free publicity. And sometimes they'll pitch a story just because it's a human interest factor. I actually had somebody today who sent me an email and said, I know you're very active with Girl Scouts, and this might be an interesting angle to a story. There's a certain troop, and their leader is a dad, because they couldn't find a mom in that community who was willing to do it. And the kids worked very well with him, and some of the parents were upset, and they wanted him out because they didn't think it was right to have a dad be a leader for Girl Scouts. But you have den mothers for Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
So I haven't called her back yet, but I mean, that's just an example of some of the story ideas that people will send me.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on the show, Ms. Varon. Thank you for watching A-List. I'm Tatiana Areizaga. See you next time.